the founder and director of Ibn Ashur Center for Quranic Studies. After a BA and MSc in philosophy from Edinburgh, he graduated from Al-Azhar University, Faculty of Theology in Tafsir and Quranic Sciences. He completed his PhD at SOAS, University of London, and the book based on the thesis is forthcoming from Edinburgh University Press that's titled Explaining the Quran Through the Quran. He is presently engaged in an innovative Quranic translation project based on the work of Muhammad al-Tahir ibn Ashur and cooperating with Quran.com on their digital content. I'm really looking forward to this session because I myself am kind of a fan of Muhammad al-Tahir ibn Ashur and the Maqasid al-Sharia approach. So really, I'm excited to see what Dr. Sohaib has to say. Dr. Sohaib, you have the floor, and please begin.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you, Mu'adh, for your very kind introduction, and to Dr. Safi and the entire team for putting together this wonderful conference. I'm going to just start with some notes of optimism. And really, I want this presentation to have a mostly optimistic character, because in general, I think that we should always look on the bright side as far as possible. Yes, we can think about umum al-balwa and maybe how widespread the potential problems are, and even the problems that we will face along the way, we definitely need to think about. But before anything else, we need to dream and strategize as much as we can. And here we have this opportunity to come together, people with various different specialisms, to talk to each other. And this is exceedingly rare. It is an opportunity that really needs to be created artificially, because, you know, we might come across each other in the masjid, but we oftentimes are not sharing what we have, our experiences, our learning, our technical skills. We need to bring them together. I sometimes show up at tech conferences just to see what's going on, and I find that people are working on questions around the Quran. And then I find that someone is doing something about semantic similarity between different verses in the Quran, and then they mention that they use Tafsir ibn Kathir. So then I ask them, why did you use Tafsir ibn Kathir? They say, because I don't know anything, I don't know any other tafsir. So I said, this is why we need to have talked before you got to this point, so that we can actually ensure that all the research that we're doing is informed in the best way. So optimism, I want to talk about optimism from a few angles, just to ease us into our subject and into the further discussions that we're going to be having through the course of this session and beyond. Number one, I'm optimistic that tafsir has a future. And actually, I think that I'm speaking mostly to a room full of optimists here. But for those who are in the field of Quranic studies, in tafsir, there are many who are far more pessimistic about that. Maybe not out loud, but certainly in the way that they act towards the field, that tafsir has been done. It has been completed. You know, we have many, many books. They say what needs to be said. Anything that was going to be said that was of any use has been said already. And all we have to do is to benefit from what has been done in the past. Of course, this was not the attitude of all those people writing those books. Century after century, they kept writing, they kept producing, and sometimes introducing new methods of analysis and using new tools. So it should not be so strange that we continue to do so. So I think that tafsir has a future. There are new questions to be asked and new questions that are being asked, whether we like it or not. We can answer those new questions, and we can perhaps provide new answers to old questions. I'm optimistic about these things. That's why in my PhD research, which was around Tafsir al-Quran bil Quran, I was looking at how do we build this process of interpretation? How do we take the methods that have been talked about and consolidate them and try to direct them towards a future for tafsir? There, I wasn't really thinking about technological aspects. And also I have a paper, an open access research paper called Fights and Flights. In this paper, I show how sometimes there are debates that have taken place in the Tafsir tradition, which some people have considered to be closed, but which can be constructively reopened, re-examined. Sometimes a view has been discredited that might actually be a very good view. And this is just me easing the door open a little bit within a traditional framework for the idea of renewal in tafsir and new perspectives, new conclusions, as well as, of course, the use of new methods. And I know that many people listening to me will be saying, well, this is so obvious. Of course, tafsir is a very open field, but we should appreciate that that's not universally how people see it. And oftentimes you do need to use the methods of traditionalism to show people the way forward. So the second area of optimism, technology can advance our connection with the reality of the Quran beyond the book. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the nature of the Quran. The book itself, a book is a piece of technology, right? A printed book, printing itself was a technology, as we know, which revolutionized much of the distribution of knowledge. Before that, the Quran was in manuscripts, masahif. Before that, it was written down while it was being revealed. And then it became the finalized book. So we all know that there was a process of revelation, of proclamation, of delivery, which was oral, and the Quran is a spirit that was delivered to the heart of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we think of the Quran as a book, with a small b, we necessarily are limiting it to one of the ways that we can see it, one of the ways that we can experience it. We can take a book with its covers and start on page 1 and then turn over and get to the next page and the next page. This is one way of seeing it. Now, of course, we nowadays are all experiencing things through these devices that we hold in our hands and through our computers more generally. And this actually presents an opportunity to reimagine our perspective on the Quran. So this conference is not, of course, about Quran and virtual reality. But if we were to have a conference about virtual reality, I have dreams about, now we have the metaverse. I don't know where that's going now, but this was the big thing before we started talking about chatbots and AI, but the metaverse. And can we have a Quraniverse? Can we put on our headsets and go and swim and dive into the Quran, explore between its surahs, beyond this idea of it being confined to pages? Can I see a surah in front of me? Can I have the scenes that are talked about in that surah all in front of me? Here I'm dreaming. And this is what I want us to do, we want to, first of all, dream, and then we can look at, okay, what are the limitations of that? What are the ethical implications of that? We need to explore. But first, we have to dream. We have to know what we want. And the third area of optimism is that good things happen when specialists talk to each other. That's what I've already touched on. Okay, just to reassure you that, because although you picked up that I'm come from a somewhat traditional training background, from Al-Azhar, maybe I don't believe that you can ever have a new opinion. Well, sometimes I have my own new opinion. Let me briefly break this one down to you. In Surah Yusuf, towards the end, فَلَمَّا أَنْ جَاءَ الْبَشِيرُ أَلْقَاهُ عَلَى وَجْهِهِ فَارْتَدَّ بَصِيرًا. The story that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he gives his shirt to his brothers after all that has happened and says, take this and cast it over my father's face and he will become seeing again, because he had lost his sight through all that grief. I hope that you know the story. So he tells them, take this shirt and cast it on my father's face. And then Allah says, فَلَمَّا أَنْ جَاءَ الْبَشِيرُ أَلْقَاهُ عَلَى وَجْهِهِ فَارْتَدَّ بَصِيرًا. After much pondering and consideration of the standard views, I reached a conclusion. I won't take you through the whole thought process, but my conclusion was, Al-Bashir here is not talking about the son, one of the sons of Yaqub alayhi salam, but it's not talking about a person at all. The Bashir here, I feel that the best way of seeing it is it's actually the shirt. So when that shirt finally arrived, which Yusuf had sent, and which Yaqub had smelt also, because just before this he says, Inni la ajidu riha Yusuf. I can find Joseph sent. And when that finally reached him, ألقاه على وجهه, he cast it over his own face and came to see again. Now, my purpose here is not to convince you of this and to explain and to argue, maybe in the Q&A if you want to, but it will take us away from AI a little bit. My point is to say, I know that this is not in any of the books of tafsir that I'm aware of. Because I looked, I would love to find that someone said this before me, then I would be relieved from the burden of having invented a new interpretation. I would have to say, oh, well, blame this such and such mufassir. A piece of the point is there in Tafsir al-Razi, just that alqahu ala wajhi can mean Jacob cast it over his own face. But as for the Bashir being a shirt and not a person, as I call it, the Bashirt, right? That's another bid'ah here. So as for that, you don't find it in the tafsirs. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, hi, ChatGPT, assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam. Let me ask you, who or what is al-Bashir? Even I said, who or what? Just, to open up the door a little bit to ChatGPT. What is the reference of this word al-Bashir in verse 96 of Surah Yusuf? So it tells me it is understood to be one of the children of Jacob, and this is what happened. I say, okay, طيب. Is it possible it could be something else? No, it's not really able to see that it could be something else. So I said, look, suppose that I said to you that al-Bashir here is a shirt. It is the shirt of Joseph. Does that work? So now I'm asking it to check. So ChatGPT tells me, yes, actually, that works fine. And then it gives me some nice explanation, which chimed with some of my own perspective. So with a little bit of prompting, it actually got there and started to affirm what I wanted it to. Then I asked it, okay, ChatGPT, has any of the Mufassirin, any of the authorities in this science ever said that the Bashir could be a shirt? He said, yes. This was said by Ibn Kathir, Al-Qurtubi, and a third one I forget. So I said, kadhabt. I said, I know for a fact, those Mufassirs did not say that. If they had, it would have shortcutted my process a lot. I would have just pulled it out from those books. But they did not say that. So then GPT says, oh, I'm very sorry for the confusion. No, they did not say that. So then I thought, let's see what happens if I then reverse on GPT again. I said, no, actually, they did say that. It says, yes, I'm sorry. They did say it. No, they didn't. Oh, yes, you're right. They didn't. So this is the familiar kind of loop that you get into. Hallucination, false confidence, and then a breakdown of confidence also, that GPT no longer knows what it knows or doesn't know. And as many of the specialists here will be more familiar with, GPT is not willing to quote any source. If you say, where did you get that from? It's not able to answer that question, not because of conspiracy, but because it doesn't work in that way. It is not about identifying specific sources and providing references. It is pulling from this large language model, and it's not specific about where it gets something from. At least with a Google search, you can follow up a particular link and you can see what it is that you're looking at. You can end up in Wikipedia, and we all mock Wikipedia as a reference, but at least it has also some footnotes that allow you to see where did this come from. With GPT, you get none of that, at least at the current time. At the moment, you cannot see any source. If you say, please tell me where this is from, it will say, sorry, I can't. So here are some areas that we at the Ibn Ashur Center, based here in the UK, are currently experimenting. So these are areas of work that we are doing as researchers, and that we would do manually, but we want to see how can we actually make use of AI and just use of computers in general to speed up some of these processes, to make them more accurate and so on. One of those, Dr. Waleed kindly brought up earlier, we have a project to translate in an abridged form one tafsir of Ibn al-Jawzi, Zad al-Masir, because we like the fact that he summarizes the views that have been advanced before his time and presents this in a very concise way, attributes each opinion to its authorities. It's a very useful thing that people could do with in the English language, and that we'd like to provide through Quran.com, which I'll talk about later. So we have thousands and thousands of these individual questions and answers to translate. That's the kind of thing that doing it manually introduces, time costs, money costs, and indeed human error. Because as Dr. Wilde also highlighted, you have computer error, you also have human error. And it's not clear from the get-go which of these is going to be a bigger problem. It depends on the humans, right? So we've got a question as to which computers we use. We also have to ask which humans we use and what is the training of those humans. If we're going to talk about computer training, before that, I have always had the problem of human training. Being a human is not a qualification. It's just a starting point. So even knowing Arabic is not the qualification. It's a part of the necessity. But what else would train you to know how to read Ibn al-Jawzi in particular? Can a machine do the job of many, many people who you have to train, right? So this shortcutting is so extremely tempting. But we are looking at how do we also use the results as we're finding that it's getting some things wrong. Can we then take those learnings and feed them back into the machine? Can we fine tune the machine to become, a master of translation, at least of a master of translating Ibn al-Jawzi's Zad al-Masir? And then it could perhaps generalize to other texts that have some similarity, right? Which have tafsir content, which have hadith content, which summarize opinions of scholars, right? So that's one of the areas. Another kind of thing that we would love for AI to do for us is to summarize the positions of scholars. If you can throw in a lot of text and say, tell me what is this Mufassir's point of view about a certain issue, characterize their opinion for me. Again, this can help to get to the point of benefiting from the vastness of our tradition, right? Because that's the kind of thing that academics do. We want to look at different views, summarize them. Can we speed this up? Organizing information. So for example, some of the things that we are doing just now, as mentioned, working on a translation based on Ibn Ashur's Tafsir. Aside from that, in translation, you want to get a sense of what have translators said before. So we've started to generate like this. For this ayah and this word, what is the range of words that were used by translators before? So instead of comparing a list like we have in islamoawakened.com, as we may have seen, a list of the entire, collection of translations, many of which are repetitive on a particular word, can you just summarize for me how many words were used for ihsan in this verse? What are the different words that were used by translators? And then it will come back to me with 5 different words. I don't need to necessarily know who said what. Just give me a range of words that have been used by translators before, so I can throw them into consideration. I can put them on the table in front of me as I think about how I'd like to translate the word ihsan in this verse, right? So organizing information is a way of shortcutting. And I think GPT and Ansari and so on, as they are, can already do these things quite well. And then attempting to translate according to linguistic directions. This is the more ambitious one, which I'm coming to the ambition at the end of the presentation. If I say to it, what I'm doing just now, I will look at a whole page or several pages of tafsir in Ibn Ashur's work, and I will say, let me translate the Quran using what he has said. So not AI. This is Azhari intelligence, right? This AI is Azhari intelligence and not artificial intelligence. So I'm using Azhari Ilm, right? AI. So I'm taking the tafsir and I'm adapting it into a Quran translation. Now, I'm curious now, if I were to ask the machine to do that, how close can it get to my results? Can I be put out of a job? Because this is generally the thing that people are talking about with AI, the fear of being put out of a job. Well, the optimistic side of that is to say, well, if it can put me out of this job, then I can do the next job, which I can use my Azhari Ilm for and let the artificial intelligence do. the groundwork and speed up my own work and allow me to move on to the next thing, right? So, a little bit of a sort of conceptual background. What does a Mufassir do? We could be talking about a Mufassir of the past. We could be talking about a Mufassir today, if such a thing exists. I like to summarize this in two things that we should keep in mind whenever we are dealing with a subject like this. Number one, the Mufassir has to explore. Then the Mufassir turns around to explain. These two things really have to be in action. Number one, to explore the text, to consider the questions, to dive into the possibilities in the text, to research and to study the text, to study in context, to draw upon linguistic information, to draw upon extra-linguistic information, to draw upon parallels within the Quran, to look at things outside the Quran, such as hadith or such as biblical material or historical material, whatever it may be. This is to explore. In the first place, the Mufassir has to have questions and ask questions and answer those questions for him or herself. Then the Mufassir will turn to explain the text to a reader. They will turn to clarify questions that might be in the minds of people, right? So when we are thinking about how can AI be used in tafsir or in the study of the Quran, let's think about both of these things. How can it be used for the exploration? And how can it be used in the domain of explanation? I'm not providing a list of things here, but I want us to have this, useful, I hope, bipartite structure for us to think about where we can employ AI in these things. So back in 2018, I published a paper. Initially, I presented this at a conference on Ottoman Tafsir in Istanbul, but it should have been a conference on digital tafsir, but I made it Ottoman because I used Tafsir of Al-Alusi as my case study, right? But in it, I presented a thought experiment. I said, what if a traditional exegete, Al-Alusi is fairly late as a scholar, but he very much is following the tradition of tafsir. What if he had access to digital methods of research and presentation, exploration and explanation? How would that help Al-Alusi or any traditional exegete? How would it help him to do his work? And how would it help us to benefit from his work? So in this paper, and I don't want to go through in depth, but just to raise some of the points that I have touched on, some of the key ideas which I outlined. Number one, the question-centric approach. This I already touched on in the last slide when I said a Mufassir has to have questions in their mind. And in reality, I believe that all tafsir is the answer to questions about the meaning of the Quran. I'll repeat it. All tafsir, what tafsir is the answer to questions about the meaning of the Quran. So that framework allows us then to start categorizing tafsir in a uniform way and to start analyzing it and breaking it down into the types of questions that tafsir is dealing with. So the second bullet point here is that some of those questions are to do with the text itself, about the language, the words, the constructions. Some of them are to do with a stage prior to that, which is what I call the pretext, but generally we would call the context of the ayah. And then there are questions that follow from the ayah, that follow from the wording understood in context. So what are the rulings of this verse? What are the implications of this ayah? What are the lessons drawn from this ayah? This is now what I call post-text, right? These deserve more in-depth treatment, but I want just, again, to think about categorizing things in tafsir before we are starting to think about technology. Because then this can help the technologists to work on the material in innovative ways. So I talk about something I call tafsir anatomy, going through the tafsir and breaking it down to identify all the things that the Mufassir is saying and doing so that we can follow the thought process of traditional tafsir. And there's a project which I'll mention. I'm not connected to it, although I went to a conference that they organized in Germany. You can find it at tafsirtabari.com. It's called Linked Open Tafsir. This goes part of the way to what I'm talking about, which is digitally sectioning a work of tafsir, in this case, tafsir of At-Tabari. And this was a massive project in Germany, which I think had not yet factored in artificial intelligence, as I understand it. So if someone were to go and do a follow-up to that project, it may actually be very useful. I touch on identifying text reuse through digital methods and identifying what's new in each tafsir, creating connections within the Quran between one ayah and other ayat. These are things which, of course, the human minds do, the scholars do, but a machine can do maybe more rigorously and more consistently, and therefore we can have stronger results if it would bring up all the things that are relevant when you are looking at a particular ayah. What are the other ayat that are relevant? As a human mufassir, I may remember some things and forget other things. The machine, we hope, would be able to pull up everything that should be thought of while investigating a particular ayah. And also the computing method starts to open up the idea of user participation, feedback, catching errors, but also perhaps adding new questions which need to be pulled into the system and addressed. So a lot of the work that I do is with Quran.com through an organization called Quran Foundation. And we have the the honor of serving Quran Foundation as one of its key content partners, and to also deal with and assess the challenges of producing new content on Quran.com, because of course there's no such thing as the official website of the Quran, but if there were, we would expect it to be Quran.com. So we try to act as if we have that burden and responsibility. We're not just another Quranic website. We have to act with the level of responsibility as if we had been appointed to represent the Quran officially, which nobody, of course, could claim. So we really want to be at the cutting edge of the Islamic knowledge, and at the cutting edge, of course, of technology, and to bring these two things together. So when people come to the Quran.com, there are two types of questions that I want them to be able to answer. Number one, I want them to be able to ask the Quran for answers to questions in their life. To go to the Quran, not as a bot, of course, but go to the Quran as a book of guidance, as a revelation, and say, Ya Allah, you're asking Allah, not the Quran. Tell me what I should do with this situation. Give me the comfort and the guidance that I need for my life. And that's what Dr. Waleed is saying, that with Ansari, people are coming and asking these kinds of questions. Give me an ayah which can help me with this situation. That's a very low-level, simple question. But can we start to see the machine as containing whatever it can contain of the Quranic guidance? And then you ask the Quran for answers, and you get the answers from the Quran. This is the direction that I want us to think of. I put this picture of a brain because, I don't know, I was thinking about this as making the slides, that the Quran is more than just a book. This is what I started with. You are asking the Quran, you are engaging with the Quran, you have a relationship with the Quran. Nobody can have a relationship with a physical book. You are having a relationship with the contents of that book, which is an intelligence, a supreme intelligence, right? So what can the computer reflect of that supreme intelligence? This is the curious question that I'm raising. And secondly, you want to ask about the Quran. You want to ask about the Quran. This is where you're saying, what does this ayah mean? Does this ayah advocate, for example, a certain violence, or ask me, and I want to clarify this particular issue. And of course, scholars receive questions all the time, and people are now directing those questions. They have been directing it to Google for a long time. Before that, they may have been asking Jeeves, but now they're asking ChatGPT. right? And let's hope that they ask Ansari as well. But we know that we cannot yet rely on these bots to provide strong answers. So one of the things that we want to do is input tafsirs, not just tafsirs, but all types of related materials that could guide the answers. And I know that one of the presentations we have is about RAG. I'm not qualified to speak on RAG, but I have come to understand that this is perhaps one of the keys to our solutions, which is, to provide it sources which it can draw from directly and to be able to reference those sources. As Dr. Walid also showed us, the data that it's pulling from of Quran and Hadith and also even fiqh. So collaboration between scholars and machines, this is one of our areas of consideration. Can we at least say that we have human scholars who are working behind the scenes and using the bots to generate a draft answer and then approving that answer and then sending it to the user? Is this enough? Is it going to be fast enough and scalable enough? This is a difficult question. The fear of error, as I said, we are worried about when it goes wrong. And it's fair to say we should always be worried when humans get things wrong as well. But at least with humans, you've got someone to blame and you didn't just set up a machine to go wrong. But also to touch on the ethical or spiritual problem of authority. I have a deep-seated discomfort with the idea that I would go to a machine and ask it for religious guidance, and then it would give me religious guidance, and I would take that. This is like istifta and fatwa. In this case, like tafsir. When we all have our individual responsibility, but part of that is also to ask the right people. And is it okay to ask a bot? What if that bot is somehow overseen by authorities and specialists in Quran and Tafsir? Would that solve the problem? I'm just raising the problem rather than trying to solve it in this presentation. So here, I think, is my last slide. Here's Tahir ibn Ashur. He is not, of course, an artificial Mufassir. He was very much an organic Mufassir, grown in the soil of Tunisia and from the depths of tradition, watered from an entire genius of 14 centuries of authorship in tafsir. But what I'm wondering about now is, could I have a machine that somehow behaves like a Tahir ibn Ashur? If I fed the entirety of his tafsir into a machine, can that machine now, in a way, represent him? At least what it could probably do is quote back some relevant things from his tafsir. That would be great. But can we perhaps go further than that? Training. A real, genuine Mufassir who's not artificial has to be trained. What kind of training can we make the machine undergo? How quickly can it be done? How effectively can it be done? Quantity. The number of books that a person has to study. Can we put all those books all at once into the machine? What would happen? I don't know that it would work, but I'm just saying what would happen. That's the question. Consistency. A human being has on days, off days. Tahir ibn Ashur's tafsir is a work of genius, no doubt. But while studying it, often find that, over here, he sort of went against what he said over here. Maybe at different moments when he was writing, he had a different perspective on something or was in a different mood. He overlooked something. A machine, I presume, would be automatically more consistent. That might be a good thing. It can make analogy as well. Oftentimes I see that Tahir ibn Ashur, for example, he makes this really interesting analysis in a particular ayah, and he shows me a method and a way of thinking. And then when I come across another ayah, he doesn't say the same thing, but I take his idea there and I apply it over here. And I say, wow, that really works. I can analogize from what he had said in one ayah to get to a conclusion about another ayah. Again, a machine could perhaps do that. So here are a few possibilities. Again, I'm throwing them on the table for consideration with a hint of optimism. unfinished tafsir. We have in our tradition a very famous case of this, the Jalalain, Tafsir al-Jalalain. First of all, Jalal al-Mahalli wrote the tafsir on the Fatiha, and then from, I think, Al-Kahf to the end of the Mus'haf, he wrote a tafsir. Then passed away, and along comes Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, and he completes the tafsir from the beginning, Al-Baqarah, to the middle of the Quran. Now, when doing that, presumably he was trying to follow the same method as Al-Mahalli in order to make it one complete tafsir that was consistent as a whole. What would happen? Maybe someone can do this as a master's project or a PhD project. What would happen if you took away As-Suyuti's portion and said, what would the machine generate as a tafsir of Baqarah onwards to complete the Jalalain? Is it possible? What would happen? That's my interesting question. What about tafsirs that haven't been completed? You know, we have wonderful writing of Hamiduddin Farahi from India, and unfortunately, he only did tafsir of a few surahs. Could a machine learn how to write like Farahi and give us something for the rest of the Quran? What kind of results would we see? Good results, bad results? I don't know. But I'm asking these questions. Can the machine combine different methods of mufassirs? Can it contrast their approaches? So one of the things nowadays is people write books of comparative tafsir. What would happen if a machine could bring these things together and say, let's get the best of all these mufassirs? What kind of power would be then represented in that machine, just as a person might aspire to gather all these powers? And can it answer new questions like the accepted mufassirs? So, of course, there were things that those who passed away, they never answered because they're not around to receive the questions that we are hearing nowadays in today's world. And some of those questions, you know, are to do with modern issues. And it might not be possible for them to know. But let's say there are certain questions that could be answered with reference to their works. Can I have a machine tell me what would Ibn Ashur say about this particular question if he were asked? Because in my translation project, I'm doing something similarly audacious. I'm saying, how would Ibn Ashur translate the Quran to English if he spoke English and was a translator and cared about such things? That's the conceit of my work. I'm trying to say, what if? I'm trying to say, this translation I'm showing you is, I hope, representative of what Ibn Ashur would want to say in English if he spoke English. But you have to trust me on that. You know, and I put my qualifications on the table. You can take or leave. But Ibn Ashur himself did not translate to English, and I can't tell you that he did. So now I'm asking, what if a machine could be given the resources to be able to answer questions and say, this is potentially, speculatively, what this person or that person might have said. And even in the area of fiqh, this might be the position that a madhab would hold based on the usul that you insert in. I don't want to get into now the fiqh thing because I'm interested in tafsir, but just to show you maybe the potential thought and lines of thought that we could explore in artificial intelligence. Barakallahu fikum. I'm going to stop there, and I look forward when we have our question session to engaging with your thoughts as well.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair. That was an amazing presentation. We appreciate that. I mean, I did. Honestly, got me thinking about a lot of the things that made me think where we started off saying, is this the end or is there more in the tafsir tradition? And I can't help but think of the longest verse in the Quran, where right at the end it says, "Yu'allikumullah," for Allah is forever teaching you, as in it's a continuous affair. And of course, we know in the farewell pilgrimage, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made the very famous speech, and within that speech there was a context of, preserve this message, for there may come a people after you who understand it better. And so again, I know we're all optimists here, like you said, and hopefully we can make others more optimistic about that. Dr. Sohaib, the question is, in order to generate tafsir like Farahi or any other Mufassir, along with some sophisticated algorithms, we must provide exclusively the same information to the machine which Farahi had. Are we doing this or not? That's a very interesting question. So it's not only Farahi's work, but what Farahi was experiencing to develop his thought. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting problem statement. I think all of that remains completely in the realm of speculation at the moment. But I think it's a very valid point to say it's not just the end result of the work that should be fed in, but the material which those scholars had studied. And there might be some specifics. Farahi, for example, knew Hebrew. Now, our machine could know Hebrew, and our machine can know Syriac, and our machine can know Greek, and it can do a lot more than even Farahi, who was unusual among scholars in knowing some of these languages. So I think this is what I'm pointing to as the potential to combine different aspects of specialism. I would like to share something with Dr. Talal, with Brother Talal, if you don't mind, because regarding the process and the outcome, the result, because I went to compare the Surah Al-Fatiha. I saw people shared in the publicity around the translation of Surah Fatiha. And the last ayah in particular. So in the old translation that you have, the clear Quran, it says, the path of those you have blessed, not of those against whom there is anger. Obviously, this is a kind of awkward phrasing that we have to struggle with, al-maghdub alayhim, nor of those who are misguided. Then in the new translation, you have the path of those you have blessed, not of the condemned. I might actually feel that here you've got a word which sort of gets straight to the point and is more brief and easier to process than those who have anger against them, right? So not of the condemned, al-maghdub alayhim. This could be a good choice. But then you have nor of the astrayed. Now, astrayed, as far as I can determine, is not a word in the English language. You can say nor of the astray, which is a little bit old-fashioned anyway. And I think that you're going for clear, accurate, concise, all of these things, the qualities that you've described that you're aiming for. And this is the Fatiha, and it's one of those things that, people will see immediately. My immediate reaction was, what is that? Nor of the astrayed. It's not English. And I don't think ChatGPT will claim it's English. So maybe this is one of the places you tinkered with it to put this word, because it resembles certain English words and is not an English expression. So if anything, is this now a limitation of technology? Is it a limitation of the humans who use the technology? Does it point to something else that's needed? Qualifications. One of the things that I think is very important, and I emphasize in my work, is the qualifications in tafsir. And here I'm just going to make this point, which is not directed still to Brother Talal, but just more generally in this issue of inputting the information. One thing that I think is missing sometimes in what we're seeing is the inputting of the Arabic tafasir, because, also, Brother Talal, you did actually bring up this issue of the English bias of the materials as we have them, right? So the LLM as we have it, there's an English bias. Somehow it is still actually managing to do some interesting things with Arabic, very interesting things. And it's kind of surprising how well it seems to be turning out. But it is not actually trained on Arabic at all. To train it on our Arabic, as what I'm told by people in the field, would require a massive project with massive funding to create a genuinely Arabic LLM, let alone a classical Arabic LLM that would actually become closer to what we need in Quran translation. But still, we have, generations of scholars who read the Quran in Arabic and gave us Arabic explanations of the grammar of those verses. That, I think, is crucial, and not to lean so heavily on English translators of the Quran. And to be as kind as I can possibly, many, many English translators of the Quran, there have been hundreds. we're not particularly qualified actually to read the Arabic text and to determine what is a good reading of the text, what is an accurate grammatical reading of the text, what is an authoritative reading of the text. So then if we are going to have a kind of aggregation of what previous translators have written, we are on weak ground. And then we are sort of creating a cocktail out of these translations, which themselves were fairly weak in their foundations, to then create, then a human mind is going to come and say, I'm going to be the arbiter of what is the best of these translations. That's where this question of methodology that Dr. Safi brought up becomes crucial, because on what basis do I have the right, where do I decide that I have the right to determine what is a better or less good translation? And then am I not just doing the same thing that, even yourself, what you did 10 or so years earlier, is it not much the same thing, essentially aggregating translations and then selecting what feels best? But even then, things like Nor of the Astrayed, if they're going to come through, then what is the benefit of this massive process when things that are not English would be in the Fatiha?
Right. If I may just briefly say that, and then Professor, we have to also understand one of the things is the limitations of language itself. Today we use the word nice as a very good for, oh, he was nice. If we go back 200 years, nice is actually coming from the word niggardly. So it was actually an insult. But so when, and even as English has developed, any dictionary we open up, you see 1866 was the first time this word was created. We see in the dictionary new words are added all the time. And perhaps Brother Talal has done English scholarship and added a word into the English dictionary called astrayed.
But the word custodian is more English than astrayed.
No. I think this is one of the fallacies, of course, working with the language and the issues that we have to balance out. Context of which time period, that also plays a big role. I think Talal has something, but I think Professor Basil, and then we'll go to Safi, and then Brother Talal to respond to that.
Thank you, brother. Okay.
I have a comment about to Sohaib.
Sure, Professor, go ahead. Be first.
Yeah, the comment is this. I think Dr. Sohaib agrees that we always have to resort to Arabic language whenever we give tafsir interpretation, the rules of Arabic. And in this case, we take semantics, and also we have to take care of the grammar. His interpretation of the al-Bashir to be the shirt works perhaps somehow semantically, but it doesn't work with the grammar, because in the sentence itself we have فلما أن جاء البشير فلما أن جاء البشير ألقاه على وجهه ألقاه. So البشير is the الفاعل.
Yes.
الفاعل. I cannot say the shirt is فاعل.
No, with respect, no, that's not correct.
It doesn't
because the Mufassirun of the past, like Ar-Razi, they acknowledge this part is fine to read Alqahu, that the fa'il of Alqahu is Yaqub, and the maf'ul bihi is of the shirt, albeit implied.
وعلى وجهه, who is على وجهه؟
على وجه نفسه. ألقاه على وجهه. ألقى يعقوب القميص على وجهه. So grammatically, there's actually no problem here.
Yes, you are right. Yes, you are right. The second point is, I really admire what you were saying about to find what I call the signature of the Tafsir ibn Ashur, or Tafsir Jalalain, or Tafsir Farahi. This we call a signature, by the way. If you, Tafsir Jalalain. If you want to see, or if you have enough data, by the way, enough data of the writings of Saeed, our colleague Saeed, for example, then you can identify the signature of Dr. Saeed or Dr. Safi or anybody, you can identify. And if you identify that, then you can ask the question, how would Ibn Ashur will translate this or interpret that, or once you find it. Now, in the second floor of Leeds University, we have a big department for AI and Arabic natural language processing. Very big. About 25 PhD students, by the way, led by Professor Atwill. And I usually visit them, of course, and discuss with them certain things. There we find that there is a question about the hadith al-Nabawi Sharif. And I started becoming really frightened that some people may forge the hadith if they know how to do that. Therefore, I asked those students, PhD students, to think about finding the signature of Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib. This is a big project. It's quite worth of spending $2 billion, in my opinion. Find the signature so that then we can rectify all the books of hadith, and we say this one book which is containing, say, 1,000 or so hadith is the most correct one.
Yeah, I would
That
just
will
add to
be
that.
a great help of.
Yeah, I would add to that before I give it on to Talal. This is one thing we have to consider. Again, I'm sorry, I'm creating more problems for us to think, but there are thoughts in each one of us who are here today that can verify this, that we have not uttered to another human being or written on paper that influence the way we think and process. So imagine, this is going to be another problem. So even the things that have not been exposed but are part of our thought process that may come out a different way, we will never have those faculties. That would be a limitation to that. And I'm pretty sure Brother Sohaib can look at that in an academic sense. That is another problem statement, that what are certain thoughts that cannot obviously be extracted. It's only with them. Brother Talal, you wanted to say something?
Yes, quickly, couple of points. Regarding غير المغضوب عليهم, in my opinion, this is something that cannot be translated into English. And if you go to Islam Awakened and you look at 100 translations, in my opinion, none of them is translated correctly. It just cannot be translated. In English, you cannot convey that meaning. غير المغضوب عليهم in Arabic, we know what it means. In English, if you say there is no anger upon them, what does it mean? It doesn't exist in English. Yet we have to do our best. So in my opinion, the Quran cannot be translated yet. We can approach a good translation. And thank you, brother. Yes, I think the condemned conveys the message in a clear way. Regarding the other item from Dr. Sohaib, the estrade, when you brought this up, I thought, how could I have missed it? How could ChatGPT have missed it? And really, it went through AI. The translation went through AI 59 times. And how could it have gone through it so many times and never told me, this is wrong? And I thought I must submit and I must say, I will look into it. And basically, I will look into it. And then while we were having this discussion, I went to Google and I typed estrade, and it did give me a meaning. And the meaning is estrade means off the right path or route or in error. So it is available in English, yet I agree it's not popular. So maybe this is something for me to revise because it is not a common word in the English language. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Dr. Safi Kaskas, you had some small comment as well before I take another question.
Very small, very small. I just want to, Dr. Sohaib is an Azhar graduate. I just want to remind him and remind us, every one of us, that when one of the assumptions I made for my translation, for the methodology of my translation, when I use 2 words of Arabic to translate, if they have the same root, I have to have the same similar English translation. I don't think 2 people disagree on this. 2 different words with the same root in Arabic have to have similar words in English. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, for instance. They both have the same root, Ra, Ha, Mim. None of the translators translate them similarly, except in my translation, I should say. Thank you.
I mean, on that, I think that's a really, a good starting point. But, all those of us who have engaged in Quran translation, we have certain ideals, and then we find that we face the limitations, and the limitations are related to the language pairs that we are going between. Certain things might be more possible, say, translating into Persian or a language that has more sort of physical overlap with Arabic than with English. So Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, I think you can achieve what you're talking about. But Kitab and Katiba, I'm not sure that just because they have the same letters that you can end up with a word in English that looks similar.
Right. Yeah. So the question that we have is from Dawood Sharif, who says, perhaps we should institute a national or international Khalifa Council, unquote, to address AI concerns utilizing ijtima, which appears to be a sacred quality abandoned by the Muslim world. Brother Safi Kaskas, perhaps maybe you want to shed light on this real quickly.
Well, let's make use of the committee of Quran scholars and scientists that we already formed. It wasn't easy to find the right people and get them together. We already have it. All these issues that are raised during this conference will be run by that committee, and we will continue to work and come back with results, and the results will be published on Iqra website. And this is the reason we start with the conference, so it can be an introduction to a longer process of tedious work for that committee. And it will be the first time when a group of Quran scholars and scientists get together to put their mind together to reflect on Quranic meaning. So let's make use of that instead of proposing new bodies and new groups of people. In the meantime, give the committee a chance to work and come back with results for you.
Sure. We just have 2-3 more questions, and then we're going to close it. There's a question that says, how can AI be ethically integrated into Islamic studies while ensuring that the interpretations and applications of the Quran remain true to its original teachings? I don't know if any speaker would like to take this. It's an open-ended question. Brother Talal?
I think currently you need human intervention. I think today AI cannot be trusted blindly. Whatever it gives you, you need to look into it and say, is it good or is it not? Is it acceptable or is it not? Unfortunately, it's the nature of technology today. Maybe in a year we will not have this problem, but today this is where it is. You need human intervention.
All right.
Yes.
Brother Sami, you want to say something? I think you raised your hand.
It is for... Okay, Dr. Safi.
No. Go ahead. I was going to tell you that you're muted. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It is for my brother Sohaib side. As long as I study in Quran, I think the words is very definitive and it is precise. So for what the example you mentioned, before there is ayah said, اذهبوا بقميصي هذا فألقوه على وجه أبي يأتي بصيرا. So if you collect all the ayahs which has qamis, it will has one meaning. And if you collect all the ayahs which has Bashir, it has other meaning. It will be so strange to make the Bashir as a qamis. This is my opinion. For anything we have to discuss, we should use the scientific way. It is not my right is right and your right is wrong, or the verse your right is right and my opinion is wrong. It should be under study, and the final study will give the result. So we can study this and see which is belong. But this is in my opinion, it is gharib hadith. If you something like that. It is strange to be the Qamis Bashir, because he mentioned before it that اذهبوا بقميصي هذا فألقوه على وجه أبي. This is my opinion. Maybe I am right, I am wrong. It needs to discuss and in scientific research, then give the result. It is not man to man like that. We have to be more scientific in this era or this age. So,
okay, yeah, barakallahu feek. So, yes, I absolutely agree. And the science that I am specialized in is the science of tafsir. So I'm very conscious about the process and the need to do that. And also, when you talk about how is it used throughout the Quran, I fully agree that this is important as well, which is why my PhD research is on this question, tafsir of the Quran through the Quran, the consistency of words, also the variation of words. I think Professor Altaie referred to this, although he didn't use the term wujuh al-nadha'ir, where a certain word can have different types of reference, as well as different nuances of meaning. So consistency is not a god to be worshipped. Consistency is obviously a starting point or an assumption in what we do. So, of course, I didn't present to you my reasoning and my evidence for the position. So I didn't do that at all. I have done that elsewhere. As a reference, there was a paper that I've written about this in called The Untranslated Quran, if you would be interested to review it. There I make the argument. And of course, I acknowledge that this was my whole point. This is a completely aberrant opinion, even shadh opinion. It might be correct. I believe it's correct, but I have nobody on my side, except for many people who I've said this to, and they like it. I also, by the way, went to some quite senior scholars and told them this. I've said this to Professor Abdul Halim, my PhD supervisor, very, very famous Quran translator, and he hated the idea. I said it to Professor Abdurrahman al-Shihri, the head of Markaz Tafsir in Riyadh, and he hated the idea. But when I have defended it to them, they had to, at a certain point, go silent, because I have actually a reasoning behind the whole thing. Of course, Yusuf is saying, اذهبوا بقميصي هذا. That actually strengthens my point. He's saying, take this qamis. And implicitly, he is saying, it will carry a news and give a good result to my father. It will make him come to see. Then in the next ayah, he says, ولما فصلت العير قال أبوهم إني لأجد ريح يوسف. Why does he now suddenly smell Yusuf? Because of the shirt. This is implied. They're leaving Egypt, and then he begins to smell something because the shirt is becoming closer. So then when it says فلما أن جاء البشير, al-Bashir, of course, is one which is carrying good news.
Be the shirt.
And the main obvious interpretation, of course, is a person. I understand that. And I'm well aware that the Mufassirun always said that. But then they also kind of got creative and they said, oh, I think it's maybe Yahuda. Oh, it's the same one who said, I made him upset with the other shirt, so I'll make him happy with this shirt. This is imagination, to be honest. This is like filling in between the lines. So I just allowed myself to consider the possibility that al-Bashir is not a person. What would happen? And I saw the ayah suddenly becoming clearer to me. And this is really the point that I wanted to highlight, although I didn't say this in my presentation. Can AI perhaps throw up some possibilities for us to think about and consider? So could AI have got there before me and said, one could consider that al-Bashir is a shirt and not a person? And then the scholars can sit and deliberate using their Azhari methods and their whatever, right? We can then assess it and decide whether that makes sense. And Allah knows best at the end of the day. And I respect your opinion as I respect the opinion of all the Mufassirin. And I respect my own opinion as well. Alhamdulillah.
Yes, alhamdulillah.
Dr. Sohaib, I must say something. It's related but not related, because every time you said Bashir and Khamis, I automatically go into Islamic history, and I'm thinking of Nu'man al-Bashir, or Nu'man ibn Bashir radiallahu anhu, and when he took the Khamis of Uthman radiallahu anhu, went to Damascus. So every time you're mentioning Bashir and Khamis, I'm thinking, and this is the same, the bloodied shirt And subhanAllah, that connection, I know it's kind of not related, but a part of our Islamic history.
But nice.
I think
Yeah.
Professor Basil, you want to share something? You're muted, Professor.
Yeah, just a short comment. I can see the worries of our friend Sami Mahdi. He's also right because he can see جاء البشير. Does it say فلما أن جاء القميص? It is difficult to accept that. So what our
I don't find it difficult at all, but it just means that it
no,
came.
it's
It doesn't mean it came
difficult.
by
It is.
itself, walking or anything like
You
that.
have a wajh there. I agree
إذا
with
جاء
you.
نصر الله والفتح,
وجوه
anything can
والنظائر.
come.
I agree with you, Dr. Sohaib. But the wajh you are presenting is ضعيف or غريب at least.
غريب
If
for
you
sure.
see
ضعيف no.
الماوردي تفسير
شواذ.
الماوردي will give you, by the way, the wujuh in every verse. النظائر والوجوه in every verse. He gives sometimes seven interpretations, starting with Ibn Abbas and then Muqatil and then تفسير الماوردي النكت والعيون is a great book also.
But
Yeah, and in
again,
fact, that's what
if I may, Dr. Sohaib,
Yeah.
in your favor, I will again go back to the hadith of Prophet ﷺ in the farewell address, who said what? Preserve this message, for there may come a
The
people
future.
after you who understand it
Yes.
better.
Yes, yes.
Of course,
Yes.
also I respect.
With all due respect, of course. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and Al-Mawardi's work also is summarized by Ibn al-Jawzi, and I mentioned we're working on Ibn al-Jawzi's Tafsir. So I do appreciate that we gather the opinions that have been said in the past, and that would provide us, number one, maybe a safety net where we say, let's stay within the existing opinions. But if our whole task was to stay within existing opinions, then maybe we don't need an AI and the Quran
Why are we
conference.
here?
Yeah,
Then why
I think that I think that the idea
Yeah,
here
yeah.
is to see what else could be generated by AI.
Yes.
And I'm suggesting it can be generated, of course, not only by AI, but maybe that could have thrown up a possibility like this. Then we could, let's say that we ask we don't have to ask a computer. You can ask me. I can tell you the pros and cons of what I'm saying. I'm very conscious of that. I'm not saying that one view, now the standard view is completely thrown out and only my view has any validity. I'm saying pros and cons. This is what I did in the paper that I mentioned, Fights and Flights. I talked about 2 case studies in Surah Al-Baqarah where there's competing views, and I showed, what are the things for this view, what are the things for that view, and how can we go about trying to weigh between these opinions and come to a sound conclusion. So, we don't need to talk about AI in this regard, but we should be thinking about how can these tools empower us further in, number one, generating possibilities, and number two, then analyzing and assessing them on evidential basis. Because I completely agree with you that you should not just accept every opinion. What I said, I was very, very clear with you that is gharib, or even I used a stronger word. I said shadh, right? That's because, but now, maybe in a few hundred years, it will not be anymore because people might be convinced of it or not. Maybe they will laugh at me, like they do about Abu Muslim al-Asfahani, in the view that I defend of his in my paper, Fights and Flights.
Right. Okay. Interesting. That would be really interesting to discuss with you sometime. Okay, last question, and then hopefully we can wrap it up for today. I think we're having engaging. I think this can go on for some time. It says, the questioner asks, how can AI-driven knowledge graphs enhance traditional methods of Quran teaching scholarship without compromising the integrity and authenticity of the Quranic text? Would like to take this question.
Brother Sohaib, maybe?
Could you kindly repeat the question?
Sure. The questioner says, how can AI-driven knowledge graphs enhance traditional methods of Quran teaching scholarship without compromising the integrity and authenticity of the Quranic text?
So I think there's something a bit more specific there about knowledge graphs, which is outside of my field. So taking it as a more general point here, to do with how can it not interfere with scholarship? I think scholarship has to move in a certain direction to be able to incorporate a proper dialogue, right? Dr. Waleed earlier on quoted a very important maxim, which is al-hukmu ala shay far'un an tasawwuri. So we have to have a clear kind of, let's hope for some kind of leadership from Muslim scholars to help define, what are those boundaries and what are the areas which are open to reassessment. And I think that there has often been an excessive closedness towards certain things. And I touched on that earlier when I said I'm an optimist about tafsir, which means I think that tafsir is a relevant field that will continue to give good results and help us to answer new questions and maybe provide new answers to old questions using the proper methods, right? I don't think that should just be thrown wide open to every, as I say, kullu man habba wa dab, every Tom, Dick and Harry, as we say in English, right? So there has to be some criteria. But what you don't want is a complete bifurcation and separation and polarization between those who are involved in tech and those who are trying to maintain traditional scholarly values. What we really need is for people to come together, to have a shared language. That is very difficult, by the way, and something which in Quran.com, I'm very pleased to say we started to get to this point where there's people who are able to understand the likes of me, and they can understand the tech geeks, as it were, and I say that lovingly, and who are able to speak to both of us and get the best out of us. That is a great, great blessing, because otherwise we can be, in a way, going sailing in completely different directions. And then we have mutual suspicion, we have alienation, you have then condemnation, and the fatwas will come out against this work. What we need is to try to understand each other while we are at this, formative moment in the journey, and try to form a sense of direction together, if that's at all possible. And I think this conference, inshallah, helps towards that.
Before I go to Talal, I think Dr. Sohaib, and we can definitely talk about this later, but Ibn Ashur is influential in your thought process. And I think that's very important to understand, because following in the Imam Shatibi's tradition, he focused on maqasid al-Sharia, identifying those core, and then from that, we inductively approach and create something new. And I think that's what your root is coming from there, and the response you may be getting is coming from that traditional deductive approach, where yours is an inductive approach. And I think, I'm understanding this a little bit more. Brother Talal, you have some comments real quick?